Trump threatens to veto the COVID stimulus. Lindsey Graham justifies giving money to Pakistan. And Twitter will most likely ban Trump. I'll be getting into that and more on The William Hall Show. So the COVID-19 relief bill, I talked a little bit about this on my last show. There was a lot of interesting things that were put in there that kind of came out well after I actually put that video out. And a lot of it is pretty surprising. Now, there's a ton of stuff in here, and the reason why is because the actual bill is 5,593 pages long. Now, that sounds pretty extensive for a bill that's supposed to be for COVID-19 relief. And actually, it's considered technically as an omnibus bill, where basically there's a lot of other elements put in there, a lot of money and funding that goes to things that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19. So this, of course, made a lot of people upset because right now we're at a time where we're obviously wanting relief for COVID-19 and some of the lockdowns that are happening and businesses being closed. And you have Congress basically voting to put in a lot of other funding to places that have no business getting any funding at all, especially during this point in time. So 5,593 pages. So there was somebody that basically put out a post saying that's basically assuming 250 words per page. That would be 1,398,250 words. And if the Congress people read at the American average reading speed of 300 words per minute, which is a pretty big assumption, especially for some of the people in Congress, then a congressperson might read this in about 4,660 minutes or 77 hours. And that's assuming that they take no breaks at all. Now, that's a lot of information to consume in less than the 24 hours that Congress actually had to really read through all of the details that were being stuffed into this bill. Now, I'll be getting into most of what's in there. Some of it is insignificant and some of it is pretty questionable. So we already know about the $600 that was supposed to be given to people that made $75,000 or less annually based on the 2019 statistics. But we have to keep in mind that all of this is being paid out by our tax dollars. So when you're hearing a lot of the funding for these different programs or going to different countries, we have to keep in mind that this money is our money, at least technically speaking. So the first section of this are all of the other countries that it was basically that we were giving funding to. So we were giving $1.4 billion to the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, $1.3 billion to Egypt, $700 million to Sudan, $135 million to Burma, $130 million to Nepal, and $85 million to Cambodia. Israel is also going to get $500 million, and Ukraine will nearly get the same as well. The bill also delivers $2 billion to the Space Force, $4 billion to Navy weapons procurement, and $2 billion for Air Force missiles. Now, the big issue so far is that a lot of these countries have absolutely no business getting our money. The most egregious was the $700 million to Sudan, which makes it doesn't fit at all with what's going on. And once again, keep in mind, none of this has anything to do with the coronavirus. This is all funding right now that's going to stuff that has nothing to do with the United States even. So $2 billion to the Space Force is another controversial one. I mean, right now, that's not what we need to be worried about. Now, I understand if this was just kind of your normal budget, but that's not what this was. This was all passed, by the way, under the fact that it was a COVID-19 relief bill. So this doesn't fit whatsoever. And the legislation will send at least $10 million to Pakistan for gender programs. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit more of that later because this is one of the ones that, although it's not a significant amount of money, it kind of is bringing up a topic about gender in other countries and why we're funding this at this current point in time. So there's going to be like $300 million for migrant and refugee assistance, $10,000 per person for student loan bailout, Another $100 million to NASA. They're bailing out the Postal Service. We have money in here for the Endowment for the Arts, Veterans Employment Training, Department of Education Stabilization Fund. I'm not going to go through all of these because there's so many here. There's literally so many actual things that they are trying to give money to that it's fairly surprising that any of this went into action in the first place. And I'm okay with this if this was just a budget type of bill, where we're just putting funding where funding needs to go. At least some of these are in the United States. Now, I think it's arguable about which one of these things are beneficial to us, which one of these things, even if it's in the United States, are not beneficial to us. Most of it isn't. Most of it actually is not. And we have a lot of it going to things that make no sense. So, $9 million for miscellaneous Senate expenses. Why is this being put in here now? Shouldn't they already have money set aside for these types of things? What is it that's going on right now? And it seems a lot like the government's just finding a reason and using COVID-19 as the justification to put in a lot of funding for things that never specifically needed funding before. So very, very, very odd. Now, speaking of the COVID-19 relief bill, Trump went on video and actually put out a statement basically threatening to veto it if any of the funds or the focus of the bill is not purely on the American people.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda and influence the election. Then, a few months ago, Congress started negotiations on a new package to get urgently needed help to the American people. It's taken forever. However, the bill they are now planning to send back to my desk is much different than anticipated. It really is a disgrace. For example, among the more than 5,000 pages in this bill, which nobody in Congress has read because of its length and complexity, it's called the COVID Relief Bill, but it has almost nothing to do with COVID. This bill contains $85.5 million for assistance to Cambodia, $134 million to Burma, $1.3 billion for Egypt and the Egyptian military, which will go out and buy almost exclusively Russian military equipment, $25 million for democracy and gender programs in Pakistan, $505 million to Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, $40 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is not even open for business, $1 billion for the Smithsonian, and an additional $154 million for the National Gallery of Art. Likewise, these facilities are essentially not open. $7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico, a provision to promote the breeding of fish in federal hatcheries, $3 million in poultry production technology, $2 million to research the impact of down trees, $566 million for construction projects at the FBI. The bill also allows stimulus checks for the family members of illegal aliens, allowing them to get up to $1,800 each. This is far more than the Americans are given. Despite all of this wasteful spending and much more, the $900 billion package provides hardworking taxpayers with only $600 each in relief payments. And not enough money is given to small businesses, and in particular restaurants, whose owners have suffered so grievously. They were only given a deduction for others to use in business their restaurant for 2 years. This 2-year period must be withdrawn, which will allow the owners to obtain financing and get their restaurants back in condition. Congress can terminate it at a much later date, but 2 years is not acceptable. It's not enough. Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests, while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it. It wasn't their fault. It was China's fault, not their fault. I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation and to send me a suitable bill, or else the next administration will have to deliver a COVID relief package, and maybe that administration will be me, and we will get it done. Thank you very much.
So the first big takeaway here is basically cut out the foreign junk and put America first, which is common sense, right? Like I said, right now we are at a time when people are struggling out there. And when we see Congress take 10 months to effectively put together a bill that where most of the funding is actually not going to America at all, let alone the citizens, but going to basically bail out other countries and try to fix issues in other countries that have nothing to do with COVID-19, by the way, it is a bit odd. Now, I think, maybe there might be a case to be made about the fact that maybe these countries are struggling with COVID-19. Maybe that's the reason why we're sending funding their way, is to aid them in their fight to save lives. Well, as you've heard in the funding there, that's actually not the case at all. Most of this funding is not just going straight to the government to aid in the relief of COVID-19. There didn't really even seem to be any specific outline on what the funds were supposed to be used for. It just seems like we're just paying them money for whatever reason. And of course, a lot of these countries, based off of their past track record, is just going to take that money and do whatever they feel like they want to do with it. So that's pretty sad. The other biggest takeaway here was basically Trump was saying that there should be $2,000 to $4,000 directly given to citizens. And a lot of people are in agreement with that. And I think that that's a great idea. $600, as I mentioned in the last show, is not enough to really do anything. And it's really a slap in the face to the American citizens to pretend as if that would do anything. So after this clip kind of went out yesterday, of course, you had Nancy Pelosi go on Twitter and basically put out this post saying, Republicans repeatedly refused to say what amount the president wanted for direct checks. At last, the president has agreed to $2,000. Democrats are ready to bring this to the floor this week by unanimous consent. Let's do it. Now, Nancy Pelosi is actually lying here because really what she's doing is saving face. But first of all, she called when they passed the bill at first, Nancy Pelosi on Twitter said that this was a significant bill, that the money going to citizens was significant, and that everybody that was involved in the drafting of this bill did a great job, that it was going to save lives. Now we're seeing her kind of reverse her position on this and say, well, hey, Trump, we've always been ready to make a deal. Keep in mind, she's been the person that's actually been holding this up, because basically the fight between Democrats and Republicans was that the Democrats wanted to put in a lot of funding that really had nothing to do with COVID-19 anyways. Now, of course, that's what happened regardless. But trust me, whatever amount is there, I think it was like $900 billion total, was going to be about 4 times that if Democrats actually got what they wanted. So, Republicans did fight hard to compromise. But even this is ridiculous when you're looking at the fact that she called it significant. She believed in the bill once it was passed. And now all of a sudden that Trump has said there should be more than this. And now that he's threatening to veto the bill, she's coming out and saying, well, I agree with him, actually, that we're ready. We're ready to make a deal. This is nothing but her saving face to basically try and win some credibility, especially considering the fact that she was the one that held it up in the first place. Now, I've been kind of going back and forth with some people on Parler about this issue, about the bill, whether we should be giving Americans any money at all. And look, there's 2 sides to this that can very well be true. And I believe are both true. And both have great points. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the circumstances that we're dealing with. So first of all, some of the people were basically saying that, well, the government giving us money is only extending what the government is doing to us, basically locking us down and keeping us from being able to work, specifically in certain states. And of course, that's true. A lot of what is happening is actually a direct result of the lockdowns. And at the same time, you have other Republicans that are saying, well, regardless, we should be able to get this money. It is, in fact, our money. And I agree with both points. But at the same time, I have to look at the circumstances. And the current circumstances are that most people, or not necessarily most people, but a lot of people are in states where they are just unable to run a business. They are just unable to go to a job or get a job. And until that's lifted, we have to do something to help these people out. Now, if there's really that big of an issue, my thought is that then we should be advocating for the country to be open. But we've been doing that, and they don't care. The Democrats don't care whether the country's open or not. They just want the power. They want to be able to tell you what you can and cannot do. So there definitely are two different approaches to this, and I think both are valid points. But ultimately, I have to generally side with the fact that these are our tax dollars that are going to these foreign countries that are basically being paid back to us, but we're not getting much or any of it at all. And we deserve to get a lot more since we are the ones paying for it, since we are the ones that are funding all of this. So I wanted to take a second to just remind you that this show is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well, or wherever you get your podcasts. And I also have a Patreon where you can donate directly to the show. And after all of the craziness with the virus and the bill and what's in the bill and everyone going back and forth about how we should view what's happening with this, Lindsey Graham, of all people, defends giving money to Pakistan.
So, there are things in there. The foreign aid budget is 1% of all American spending. Pakistan is a place I really worry about. 85 countries, a woman can't open up a bank account without her husband's signature. She can't inherit property. If you're a young girl in Pakistan, life is pretty tough, so we're trying to make life better for women throughout the world. But 1% of all federal spending is foreign assistance.
Yeah, so the $25 million going to Pakistan obviously isn't a significant amount of money when you look at the rest of the bill, but it does raise a few eyebrows when you're kind of wondering, why are we sending this there? Especially when we see that it's going towards some gender programs. Now, Lindsey Graham did say, he said Pakistan is a place he worries about because the women there can't open up checking accounts without their husbands. So this is kind of interesting because Pakistan is, and a few other of these countries as well, have always been actually fairly sexist. They've mistreated women. They force them to wear certain clothing, and there's a bunch that goes on in these other countries. And obviously, none of those are good in the United States and any free civilization. We don't agree with that. But the thing is once again, is that this is a COVID-19 relief bill. So it is odd, once again, that our tax dollars are directly paying towards these things at this time. This is not the time to start trying to solve all of the world's problems, especially when it has nothing to do with COVID-19. It's one thing to say we're sending money there to help them develop a vaccine or send vaccines their way or whatever it is, but what we're seeing is a direct funding to trying to fix Pakistan or fix these other countries that are not going to get fixed. There's a lot of countries out there that are never going to come up to the level of a free civilization. They're never going to be the United States. And the United States has oftentimes been involved in trying to fix or solve these conflicts or issues that go on in these different countries. But the truth is that, of course, we should help. But once again, this isn't the bill that we were presented with. And when you have these things happening, it's basically lying to the American people because you're telling them, hey, we're passing this bill that's going to pay you and help support you during the coronavirus. Meanwhile, you're packing in all of this stuff that has nothing to do with it. The American people deserve the right to know. And when you see things like Ted Cruz and other senators coming out and saying, look, there was no way we were going to be able to read this. And yet this stuff's just getting passed off day in and day out without you knowing, and they don't even know. It's one thing for the American people not to know. It's another thing for the Senate to not even be able to fully read a document before signing off and voting on it. That is not the way that our democracy works. And omnibus bills are apparently notorious, have a history of being bad about this. We didn't even know that that was what this bill was supposed to be, but it just kind of sprung up as one. So definitely a lot of disappointing actions taking place, especially from someone like Lindsey Graham. And now Twitter is saying that they're basically going to ban Trump on January 20th. And this comes as no surprise to people that have really been paying attention to how Twitter has censored Trump, how they have basically put in all of these warnings on his tweets, which is just beyond insane because you don't have the ability to basically tell people what a certain tweet should be or shouldn't be. I mean, it's already insane that they are essentially putting these warnings under the president's tweets of all people. And meanwhile, of course, they don't treat other world leaders the same way because many of those people say some very, very, very controversial things and never does it get suppressed. Never do they keep people from retweeting it. They don't delete the tweets. They leave them up. So there's a lot of just ridiculousness going into this Twitter issue. And so they basically said Trump's personal account could face restrictions or even be banned after he leaves the White House. And right now they're protected under the world's leader policy. And based on the principle that most people would like to see what their heads of states are saying, according to Forbes. So regardless of what happens here, I have a very good sneaking suspicion that they will ban him. And a lot of the reason is that he could basically say everything Twitter likes. But the problem is that because he has basically the second, I think, largest Twitter account in the world, there's a very good chance that they're just going to just slap him just basically slap his account down and just completely take him off the platform entirely, which is why he should come to Parler. Parler is actually for free speech and isn't going to do that. Now, I think Twitter is shooting itself in the foot here because if they delete Trump's account and he immediately goes to Parler, everybody's done. Everything on Twitter that made Twitter Twitter over the past 4 years is gone. Mind you, that the growth will be exponential for Parler, and it's only going to dwindle for Twitter. Because what is holding a lot of conservatives and just normal people on Twitter right now is the fact that all of these big accounts are there. If you take the world's second biggest account and throw it onto Parler all of a sudden and take it off of Twitter, Twitter's only, like I said, shooting themselves in the foot. And I don't think they realize that. I think that they're looking at it like it's a good thing. But in reality, it's only going to hurt them more than they realize. But hey, I say let them go ahead and do it because Parler is a much better platform and deserves to have Trump there. Trump honestly should have been there a long time ago, but the fact that he hasn't will make this transition, if this actually takes place on Twitter, all that more exciting. So either way, Twitter has always been censoring what Trump has been saying. You know, you'll see a tweet from Trump about something as simple as the election and the fact that there was some type of fraud. It doesn't even have to be an egregious amount of fraud, but just even mentioning the word fraud or the fact that he believes that he won the election. And they put this massive disclaimer below it, basically saying that this information is contested. This race or the results of the election are being reported differently. But what's interesting though is, and some people have pointed out the hole in Twitter's logic here, is that if you can basically under one tweet say, well, these results actually are being reported differently for someone that's saying Trump won, wouldn't you have to do the same thing for Biden? If somebody says, by the way, Biden won, shouldn't that tweet in the same vein also have to have that this race was reported differently. But that's all of the kind of I guess the funny thing about all of this is that they're only looking at what sources they want to believe in. They only care about those sources that are approved by Twitter. They don't care about other sources that are being approved by other outlets or other videos that have gone viral showing that there's been different levels of fraud going on. So regardless of what's happening, this is an interesting time. I have a good feeling that things are going to be pretty slow as we go into Christmas. And with that being said, I hope that you have a Merry Christmas and get to spend time with family. I know that I will as well. And just to remind everybody to take a break from politics for a little bit. Take some time to actually spend it with your family and not worry about what's going on everywhere, because it's just the first way to basically either spark up an argument or to really lose faith in what Christmas is all about, or just to forget about what Christmas is about, which is Jesus Christ. So I hope you all have a blessed Christmas, and I will be returning probably the week after that with more updates on the things that are going on in the crazy world today. So I thank you for watching, and I thank all of you for helping me get to where I am today. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I'll see you on the next one. You just watched an episode from The William Hall Show. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.